welcome to the Cannabis Investing Podcast. Super happy to have you on the show today. So thanks so much for taking the time and joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Very happy to be here.
Great to have you on the show. I think we've been talking about this company for a while now, and it's good to finally have you on. So catch listeners up. How did you come to the cannabis industry? How did you come to SLANG? It's not that long that you've been there, so how did that evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. So, much like many things in life, it's who you know. I was fresh out of college. I was living in Vail, Colorado. I had a buddy up there at the time that said, "Hey, I'm going to get into this cannabis thing," and everybody kind of said, what? Like that, and at the time, this was like 2009, 2010. And lo and behold, he went and he did that. And then over the next few years, more or less solicited me to come join his company. My wife, who's a high school teacher, was absolutely against it. And so ultimately, once Colorado voted on it, made it legal, some of that resistance went away. So I came and joined forces with what was then Organa Labs. I joined in 2014. Subsequently, Organa Labs became Organa Brands. SLANG bought Organa Brands and then went public in January of 2019. And here we are.
Has your wife come around at all?
Well, now we joke about it. Obviously things have gone well for our family in particular, but certainly for the cannabis industry as a whole. And so SLANG has obviously benefited from that. And so now it's now it's a little running joke internally in our family, but you got to keep mama happy or nobody's happy. So no problem.
Absolutely. No, but I think it speaks to kind of an evolution in the industry that I hear that from a bunch of people that got in, that either they were embarrassed to say that they were in the cannabis field, or the fact that people that they knew, their kids or their spouses or their parents or whatever it is. But I think once you see that shift, I think you understand kind of the evolution of the industry in general. So I think it's nice to see, not to come down on your wife in particular, because a lot of people didn't know what that meant to get into the cannabis space. And I think people's understanding of what that means to profit off of cannabis, and also to be, distributing and selling cannabis, what that means, that it's not pushing drugs, but that it's something else entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both from Texas. Once upon a time, she comes from a very conservative family, and you can imagine how well that call went over when we said, "Hey, guess what your son-in-law is now doing for a living."
Right.
But to your point, the stigma has been radically removed, and you got to remember when we started talking about this, it was over a decade ago. So things are radically different now. Super common. I live just south of Denver in a suburban neighborhood, pretty conservative suburban neighborhood. And even in places like that, super common to see, somebody with a vape pen, gummies at the neighborhood barbecue. In many cases, the glass of scotch or the glass of Pinot has been replaced by a cannabis product. And that stigma, especially here in Colorado, is largely been removed. So definitely a positive thing for the industry. And we've come a long way, obviously.
And do you think what also helps, because there's so much talk about this specifically in the States because of all these states coming online, but Colorado has been, I think, the best to do it, the best to prove out the business viability of cannabis as a revenue generating, product. Do you think that has people living in Colorado are seeing that and taking that also to heart in terms of changing their minds?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm obviously biased because I call Colorado home and have been here now coming up on almost 20 years. But, the program here is good. It's the second largest market in the country. We're a fraction of the population of California, which is the largest.
Right.
Now, certainly we have a lot of tourism that comes here, but we've got a good system. We've got supportive politicians. We have fair regulation. It generated 2.2 billion with a B, for a state that has, less than 6 million in population. Pretty pretty impressive. And to your point, a lot of those tax revenues, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenues, are flowing into the state because of the cannabis industry. And then when you pair that with that, so many of the things that were supposedly going to be bad about this, the underage consumption, the illicit market, you know, all of these bad things just have largely proven not to be true. So it's gotten very tough. I know several people that don't consume the plant, but are very supportive of the industry here for those reasons.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's done. So talk to me a little bit, explain to listeners what it is that SLANG does and like where you guys have your tentacles in the market.
Absolutely. So SLANG's a consumer packaged goods company. I know that's become very in vogue recently in cannabis to talk about. Everybody now talks about brands and CPG, and it's kind of become the buzzword. We've been doing this since 2010. You know, we operate the oldest continuously operated licensed extraction lab in the country. That lab still runs today. So we've always been about this house of brands. So SLANG has 6 award-winning brands that compete and win in some of the most competitive markets in the country. We're in concentrates, we're in vape, we're in edibles, we're in ingestibles, we distribute flour, our products can be found in over 2,200 points of retail distribution really across the world. Dispensaries, of course, are here in North America, and we're in 16 different markets, 14 states, also Canada and Puerto Rico, and we want to win the CPG game. And what that means is that we want to have best-in-class market share, total points of distribution, branded servings, branded unit sales. In addition, obviously, that we want, you know, good, clean financials and demonstrate success there as well.
So talk to us first in terms of the brands that you're partnering with. I mean, you work with, you know, some of the top brands, the top brands in the industry. Talk to us about how you decide who to partner with and what you're looking for there.
Yeah, so when we go into a new market, we're always looking for a few different things. First of all, what's the cultural fit? Do we have aligned visions? Do you have the capabilities, you know, further and above that alignment and vision? Do you have the infrastructure, the leadership, the capital to be able to execute on the strategic plan of how to bring our brands to market? So when we do find those things, that's a good fit. And we provide a lot of value back to that strategic partner. So a lot of folks that license their brands will give you a pretty box, a nice label, and, you know, show you how to make a product, and then you're kind of get a clap on the shoulder and good luck. And that is far from the way we run our strategic partnerships. We assist with things like lab design, we assist with build out, we assist with equipment selection. We do everything in the back of the house to give these businesses the best shot at being successful, lowering their cost to produce products, bringing to them a portfolio of 100 different products of which they can choose to bring to market. And we work with them all along the way. So we do a lot back of the house to prepare them to enter into a market, but then we take that a step further and we assist them with how are those products moving through the market. So sales and marketing campaigns, resources, inside sales based out of Denver. There's a lot we do that I think provide the most comprehensive partnership or licensing offering in the industry. And you're seeing that now be validated again and again and again. Folks like Trulieve, who we're now going into a new state with in Massachusetts, Gage, what we're doing up in Canada. And again, you know, we're in 2,200 stores. So consumers speak with their dollars, and we prepare our folks that we work with to go out and capture the most of those that they can. So that's, you know, that's how we run our strategic partnership program.
And you know, kind of continuing the thread of you know, the evolution of the industry, I would say that now, you know, people are for the most part concentrating on the CPG brands. Who is going to bring that kind of brand dominance to the market, or who is already bringing that to the market? So tell me, as an expert in that, you know, that specific part of the market, where do you see kind of what consumers are looking for? I mean, there's, you know, some obvious answers, but what do you think in general kind of nails it for the cannabis consumer, or something that is, you know, a formula that they can bring an approach to the cannabis consumer that works?
Yeah, it's a handful of different things. Like I said, traditional CPG or mainstream CPG companies, the metrics they use, the KPIs that they're measuring are not like a cultivation or a dispensary, things of that nature. Again, it's around things around market share, market penetration, total points of distribution. You want to have the most eyeballs and the most consumption of your products, regardless of whether you're making them, a strategic partner's making them. How many branded moments are consumers out there in the world experiencing with your products? We're very proud to say that, since 2014, we're pushing almost 3 billion branded servings. So that means 3 billion times people have had an experience with one of our brands. And the way that we've been able to do that successfully is a few things. First of all, you've got to have consistency in your products. If I went to Vegas and I was at a bachelorette party and then I went skiing in Aspen and I see the same brand, I expect to feel a certain way. Am I meeting those expectations? Have I delivered on that brand promise? And that comes through proven process. That comes through consistency, a very rigid quality program where we're putting out very consistent, safe products. The biggest one to me, and we say it all the time, is our best ability is availability. You can find our stuff almost everywhere where cannabis is sold legally. So having that ability to be in over 2,200 points of retail distribution, being in some of the most competitive adult use markets in the country, gives us just a very unique perspective, one, and two, allows consumers to engage with our brands in multiple different locations. And when you're delivering on that expectation, when you're delivering on that brand promise, that's what builds brand loyalty. So drive awareness, deliver on the expectations, do it again on a consistent basis. And over time, you build a loyal consumer that goes into a store and specifically seeks out our products. And that's largely why we've been so successful in this space.
So something we've been talking a little bit on the show recently is the notion of when, interstate commerce opens up, when legalization develops more and more. Yeah, right. From our mouths to God's ears. When it develops more, like what that's going to look like for different companies. And I think something that people say is, one advantage is the ability to kind of produce everything consistently, no matter the inconsistent kind of details that you have to work out right across state lines. And that seems to be something that you're talking about and something that you're figuring out. Does that have to do with the scale that you have behind you, the capital that you have behind you, how you've thought about it? What is it that you're able to bring that makes it consistent? Because right now it's a difficult thing to do.
Super difficult thing to do. Again,
Yeah.
we're in 16 markets, so you've got 16 individual factories that are making these products, when the cannabis plant in and of itself is variable. It's a plant after all.
Right.
So the
Right.
soil, the nutrients, the climate that you happen to be in, all produce different levels of variability. So it's very rigid SOP. It's proven process that allows us to drive that consistency. But I would tell you that interstate commerce, when and if that comes, really favors a company like SLANG for a few reasons. One, I'm only making these things myself in our core markets, which are Colorado and Oregon. So we're able to enter into new markets in a very capital light way. If you look at the traditional MSO model, you have to raise tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to go into a new state to set up all that new infrastructure. If interstate commerce is allowed, I don't think we're going to be growing cannabis right off the Las Vegas Strip. I don't think we're going to be growing cannabis, in northern Maine, which is what's happening now, because you've got to do it within those state boundaries. These are not traditional crucibles of agriculture. So places like Southern Oregon, Northern California, the Southeastern United States, places where you have traditional agriculture, that's ultimately going to take place. And that's where these things are going to be done. And I would tell you, look at all the inefficiencies that are placed, the handicaps that are placed on cannabis businesses now. Draconian tax law, no interstate commerce, crazy taxes that we have to pay on things, or upcharges that you pay to be in cannabis, things like directors and officers insurance. There's just a whole host of headwinds that these businesses have to overcome. And when regulation allows for some of those impediments to be removed, you're going to see a massive quantum leap in the, the financial success of these companies. What bodes really well for a company like SLANG, as I mentioned, is we're very capital light in our ability to enter into markets, our ability to form strategic partnerships with the best of the best in their respective markets. That bodes really well for a CPG company when you come in, because again, they care about market share, not how many square feet of cultivation do I have, not how big is my lab, how big's my extraction machine. They're able to plug things into infrastructure that dwarfs what's happening in cannabis now. They're interested in market share, and that's a game that we do really well at.
Right, right. Yeah, I think well said. Do you feel like that going into this, you've already thought about the brands that are going to be able to make that next leap, or who you're best able to partner with in that next leap? Is that something that you guys have already been thinking about for a while?
Absolutely. We're data guys, and girls. So we are into the numbers. So we are constantly looking at analytics, consumer buying behaviors. What is basically driving sales in markets. And you see small nuance and fluctuation between markets, but largely you see the same series of events develop. We're all on the same timeline, just at different places on that timeline in our journey into, what ultimately will be federal legalization. And the things that we've seen is you see kind of the same groups of people, the same brands compete and win regardless of the markets that they're in. So there's a reason that these brands, we've got top 10, the second best selling brand of all time with Open. We're top 10 in concentrates, top 10 in edibles, top 5 in ingestibles nationally. So, and you see some of the same thing with the other competitors that are out there. It's the same usual suspects that continue to dominate market share, market after market after market. And there's a reason for that. It's consistency, it's quality, and it's the ability to expand within what your capital allows for. So we're certainly, privy to what those things are. We count ourselves amongst that group that continues to expand and win across the country. And I think one of the really unique things for SLANG is we don't just have one product or one brand. We've got 6 brands, 100 different products, 16 different markets, 2,200 points of retail distribution. So that allows for us just to cast a really wide net with consumers.
And that's really the model, I think, going forward, is what it seems to me is, the company that can coalesce those brands and move them together as not one entity because they're separate brands, but as kind of that company being one entity moving forward, kind of pooling together that type of that brand capital. But I think what it also takes is actual capital, which you guys have done a couple of deals recently, one with Merida Capital. Talk to me about those deals and the recent financing deals you've done in terms of like keeping yourselves on that path.
You bet. So, Merida was a great deal for us for a lot of different reasons, but I would tell you the capital, although it came on great terms, extremely company friendly terms, really was almost the sidelight of that opportunity. What we really got out of that deal was we're going to be going into Missouri and Virginia. So that's 2 new emerging markets for us. Missouri has a pretty wide open medical program that I think you're going to see in the next couple of years really take off because it's got very conducive regulations to good commerce. Virginia, I'm sure you've been following. There's all kinds of talk about how quickly they're going to do adult use. It looks like it's been pushed back now till 2024. But the point is, we went from a very restrictive medical program to now it's going to be full-blown adult use. Again, it's a couple of years down the line, but that's going to be a great market for us. And it's a new region over and above that kind of mid-Atlantic region going adult use. That'll be one of the first states to do so. So that's really exciting. We've got premium placement into one of the largest dispensary footprints in Michigan. We've got a great partnership there with Gage Cannabis in Michigan. So now we've got a strategic alliance with the retail group 315, which is a Merida Capital company. So what I think you're really starting to see in this cannabis industry is that capital is much more available than it has been, call it over the past year or so, maybe even 18 months. Two, companies are able to access that capital on very friendly terms. But over and above that, you're starting to see these strategic alliances form really between some of the power players, whether it's the MSOs. And Merida, I don't think a lot of people look at as an MSO, but they've got stuff in 5 or 7 states. They're absolutely an MSO. They're maybe a bit more non-traditional in the way that they do things, but they're a great group. We're very proud to be working with them and to be moving into those states. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we were able to bring in some capital on very friendly terms in addition to those things. So I think the real storyline is you're starting to see these companies put together deals that are more than just money. More than just an equity deal. There's a strategic partnership that's taking place there, and you're seeing these alliances being drawn, being formed. And that's an exciting time for the industry because, with all the consolidation taking place, people that are able to navigate that well are going to be the ones that win in the end.
Right. I think you're seeing a lot of clever deals and a lot of interesting deals. And I think what you're seeing is true. I think that only continues to develop over time. So are you of the opinion that the upcoming, legislative changes are mostly going to be centered around the financial aspects, less about full scale descheduling and decriminalization?
Yeah, I think it's going to come in tranches. Nothing in Washington, D.C., as we know, moves fast.
Yeah.
I think everybody's kind of cautiously optimistic with the change in administration and some of the signaling that's coming out of Congress. So, but I do think it's going to be a slow go. I don't think you're going to wake up one morning and it's just full blown legalization, interstate commerce, and hey, it's a mainstream industry. It's certainly, we're going to tiptoe into that. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many handicaps now on cannabis businesses, but it's such a large market opportunity that the removal of any of these things, Section 280E with taxes, being able to have more normal access to banking, all of these things are going to be basically tailwinds for the industry. And over time, I just don't think you're going to see the will of the people denied. You've got places now like South Dakota, Mississippi, that are now moving into cannabis. Like, who would have thought that 2, 3, 4 years ago? Like, just no way. But yet, even in those places, it's progressing. And these are very traditional red places. I said earlier in the interview that I'm from Texas. Even down there, I have a lot of friends in politics down there. There's an outside shot that Texas pulls a rabbit out of the hat because they see the success that's taking place on their northern border with Oklahoma, which is a fraction of their size. Oklahoma's on $1 billion run rate for a market. Oklahoma, there's 3 million people there. So I think, Texas is looking at understanding the role that they can play. And over time, you're just seeing that the momentum just will not be stopped. So I think it's going to be a slow go to get to where it's ultimately going to end up. But I think you're going to see, a little bit of good news and a little bit of good news and a little bit of good news. And all of those things are going to be welcome news, especially for the publicly traded cannabis companies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think what's interesting is sometimes we think the good news is coming from this direction. Like, Safe Banking Act is going to pass, it's going to pass. And then it doesn't. But then like 5 states come online that you're like, what? Alabama? Mississippi? It's like, it blows you. Yeah. How's that happening? So it's so interesting. And I would say the same thing with COVID. It was like at the beginning of COVID, you're like, what is going to happen with these cannabis companies who have, not as much capital as they should, certainly for the most part. And then they're deemed essential businesses, and boom, it's like, a soaring industry, not to mention the investment side of things. So yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like specifically in cannabis, you can't really be too certain of your predictions, because I feel like the spirit might be true, but it's going to come from probably a slightly different area. So I guess in that end, with kind of a crystal ball, if you think that it's going to start, that the first headwind is going to be, you know, on the financial side, maybe getting rid of 280E or some of the more draconian, you know, regulations that you've mentioned. What do you think that does? Like, what's the first iteration of kind of the next change that you see? Like, what's the consolidation moving forward, or what do you see happening in that next phase?
Yeah, a handful of things. You know, 280 being a big one. Look, so many companies are on the threshold of profitability or have recently moved into profitability, even with 280E, which for those
Mm-hmm.
that don't know is just an incredibly punitive tax that only really allows you to deduct COGS. So you're not able to operate in a normal business. And what that leads to is this whole exotic structure of I've got a plant touching business, and you try to silo that off, and you know, a non-plant touching business. It leaves all these exotic structures trying to maximize the value of the business. Well, when you remove some of those things, you're able to operate in a more normal way that many other mainstream companies are able to do. So what I think happens is you're going to continue to see consolidation. This game's not for the faint of heart. You know,
Yeah.
cannabis has become extremely big business. So you're going to continue to see consolidation. You're going to continue to see somebody that has something of value either get acquired or join forces with others to make themselves larger. I think you're going to see some positive news when it comes to bankings, positive news when it comes to taxes. That's immediately going to be a tailwind for most of these companies' profitability. Presumably, that's going to increase their value. Even for folks like us, look, we just became a plant-touching business, you know, really here in the last 6 months. So it's a material shift up in revenue. And now if you can get a little bit of good news by way of profit as well, it just makes your business more sound financially. So when those things happen, you're going to continue to see the values and the enterprise values grow of these businesses. More states are going to continue to come online, whether it's medical or moving into adult use. Ideally, at some point, you're going to see the ability for interstate commerce, which just makes us all run a lot more efficiently, because you're not, you know, you're sourcing things, whether it's the consistency we talked about earlier, or just the efficiency of your business, of how you're operating things. So for me, there's a lot of good news on the horizon for all of the cannabis industry. And for SLANG in particular, we're ready to catch that wave now. We built our business in anticipation of that time. And I'm proud to say that we're on the path to do that. We're executing, we're expanding into new markets, we're putting out new products, and we're still competing and winning in the markets that we're in. So all of those things really bode well for investors looking at the cannabis space at large, and us in particular.
And speaking of getting into new markets, you know, something that you've talked about since coming on board at SLANG has been getting into these emerging markets. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the, you know, international emerging markets that you have your eye on, that you think are developing nicely and you feel positive about.
Yeah, you know, we were really heavy. Again, we've been doing this since 2010, long before SLANG was a glimmer in anybody's eye. And we've always made a habit of zigging when others have zagged. So we were the first company to start licensing our brands, the first to go east to the Mississippi, first to develop an international licensing agreement with a group down in the Caribbean. And I think there was a lot of hype, particularly when the or the Canadian LPs came on, because it was, hey, we're in Australia and we're in South Africa and, you know, all these, you know, different places around the world. And what really happened was that import-export laws, you know, a lot of, especially the North American folks in Canada, were looking at how do we get, you know, cheaply produced cannabis to come into Canada. Well, that largely hasn't happened. You know, and then it was, hey, I've got these monstrosity of facilities up there. How do I get the cannabis being grown here, because there's an oversupply, into some of these other markets? So I think in time, you're going to see some of those come online, certainly with what's happening in Mexico, potentially Colombia, what's happening maybe in Switzerland with CBD continues to inch up and get to be a little bit more THC focus there. You know, I think there's cautious optimism, but for us, we're focused in North America. The opportunity is here now. Now, certainly that doesn't mean that other opportunities aren't going to open up around the world. I expect that to happen in time, but the U.S. is looked at as, you know, a trendsetter in so many things, and cannabis is no different. So Canada certainly got that party started as far as North America is concerned, but the U.S. really is going to set the trend. So once there is some sort of federal action or legalization, I think you're going to see the domino effect around the world of what that allows for. And certainly, we've already demonstrated that we can take our brands, take that show on the roads. That'll be no different. But for right now, we're heavily focused almost exclusively in the North American opportunity because it is so tremendous.
And then, mentioning CBD, there's obvious kind of displeasure with how the FDA has handled the CBD. Are you of the mind that it's going to be worked out imminently and it's just a matter of time, and then boom, there's the market wide open?
American politics is so complicated. It's you're federally illegal, but you're legal in these 16, 14 states and 2 other places you're doing this, Canada and Puerto Rico. You have 280E, which anyway, long story short is, who's to say, it's complicated. I will tell you with CBD, we acquired a company this past October, Lunchbox Alchemy, that has a fabulous CBD line of gummies. They're in 600 plus stores, or we're in 600 plus stores with CBD, have a robust e-commerce platform that we recently launched. And I can tell you that there is massive demand for CBD. Now, the question really becomes, is there massive demand for CBD products, or is that happening because they don't have access to more traditional mainstream THC products? We use that opportunity kind of twofold. One, the margins of going direct to consumer through e-commerce obviously are very healthy. 2, being able to distribute, again, we're a CPG company, so I'll take those branded servings wherever I can get them, and CBD allows me to go to places, frankly, that THC can't go right now. Lastly, we look at it as really a Trojan horse. Texas is one of the places we're most widely distributed with our CBD offering. And so there's consumers in Texans. Texans right now are able to have an branded experience with our products. And one day when THC is allowed there, there's going to be that brand association opportunity for that loyalty to continue for our brands. So how does it shake out with the FDA? Who's to say? When you had the Farm Bill, everybody was so excited that it seemed like, okay, finally we're getting somewhere. And it seems like many times in politics, and not just in cannabis, it's 2 steps forward and a step back. And it's not a linear, progress for cannabis at all. It's up and down. But generally speaking, much like the stock market, we know where ultimately we're going to end up. So it's how do you hang on? How do you continue to drive value in between? And ultimately, how are you putting yourself in a position to seize that opportunity when inevitably it comes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's nothing if growth and fits and starts. Do you think, do you think that SLANG as a company hasn't, the share price isn't reflecting kind of the larger bullishness in the cannabis marketplace because you guys are more behind the scenes? What do you, or is that something that you think about, or do you feel like the fact that you guys are growing in the right way, investors will start to pay notice as the story develops?
Yeah, look, I think we're tremendously undervalued, but I think there's a reason for that. So we just became plant touching. We acquired our first plant touching asset in Colorado in September of this past year. First one in Oregon in October. Since then, we've acquired several more plant touching assets. So we're just on the precipice of having our coming out party to really show investors, shareholders, what's happening behind the scenes here. So we're going to be able to have a radical shift for the positive with revenue, for example. And then following that, you're going to see an optimization towards profit. Those things are all going to come to light in 2021. We're on path to do those things. We continue to close acquisitions. So I think people are really about to see the promise of what SLANG has always represented really come to be and come to fruition. So that's why we've had a really nice increase recently in our share price. Part of that's due to the tailwinds that are happening in Washington. Like, people feel like we're close. It's almost palpable that something good is happening from a regulation perspective. Couple that with, we just had our first adjusted positive EBITDA quarter. Our revenues increased in Q3, 70+%. And that's before we went into plant touching. So rightfully so, consumers and investors are now taking a second look at SLANG, and we're going to do right by them. We're going to demonstrate progress. So I do think there's a tremendous upside. I mean, look, we trade right around 50 cents Canadian. So, to imagine that goes 4x, 8x, 10x, that only gets us to $5. So that's something I think people can wrap their heads around, and maybe a much easier climb for us compared to some others that have a much higher share price. So I do believe that there's tremendous opportunity there. And we're executing on our plan, and it's our belief that long-term, run a good, clean business, have a good, clean balance sheet, continue to grow, and do that in a very responsible way, and you will be rewarded for that in the long term. We don't spend a lot of time looking at the share price every day. That has all kinds of impact, external factors. We keep our head down and we work on our business plan, and we just want to continue to execute. That's what we're about.
Sounds like a good steward of capital to me. Tell me, were you part of the charge of becoming more plant touching? Was that something that you were driving?
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's not hard to imagine that you make a lot more money selling weed than you do selling the boxes that weed goes into. The reality is we do both. So when SLANG acquired Organobrands, they also had options on all the different plant touching businesses that were part of the whole Organobrands conglomerate of companies. So we've exercised many of those options. We're bringing those in. So certainly that was always part of the plan. That's not something new for us. But then we went out and we did Lunchbox. We went out and we've done some other things. We're constantly having those conversations to understand where is our next best place that we can go and make an investment into, whether it's through strategic partnership, whether it's through acquisition, whether it's through JV, like we have in Canada with Canopy. We're always evaluating those opportunities. But that's always been part of the plan, is to be plant touching. So that's now just coming to fruition. So you're starting to see the benefit of that and what that means financially. But that's always been part of the story. And, we're continuing to demonstrate that and execute on those opportunities.
And talk to me a little bit about, a lot of people are talking about kind of the next phase of the edible growth will be in like more tailored approaches and, how it affects you and the experience. Which I think is totally true and something that the marketplace is going to really respond to. I also wonder about the place in the marketplace for beverages and how that's going to attach itself to the consumer and their experience. And I know that you guys have some experience there and you have some presence in that part of the marketplace. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on where beverages sit in the cannabis marketplace and where you think their place is for the cannabis consumer. Like, is it going to be in the privacy of their own home? Is it going to be in a retail space? Is it going to be in like, somewhat of a bar setting? Like, where do you see that going?
Yeah, a couple things there. I'll unpack the edible piece of it first, because we're much deeper in edibles than we ever have thought about being in beverage. Edibles, you've seen a massive evolution in the product formats themselves. Microdosing, fast acting, effect-based, vegan, organic, all these different things that are kind of coming to be in the edible space. And for us, we've got two different edibles brands that both are very successful in their own right. District Edibles makes gummies and chocolate. It's a value segmented brand. So, it's gelatin. It's what you would think of a traditional gummy and a peace chocolate brand. Our Lunchbox Alchemy offerings premium. It's vegan. It's made with pectin. It's got a lot of different organic and all natural ingredients in it. It's just for a different consumer that potentially has more disposable income. It's a premium brand, so you're paying obviously more for it than you would be. But for us, it's both. Both of those consumers exist. And so when you see the evolution of the product and even some of the flavors that are coming out now, using different fruit purees, using different spices, and it's just appealing to a much more refined customer. And now that you're really able to titrate or dose those edibles, you know, it's very popular now to see a microdosed edible because 10 milligrams or 5 in Oregon is just too much for some people. So they want the ability to say, I want to know exactly how I'm going to feel. And if I can feel that effect faster, and if I know what I'm going to get, back to delivering on that brand promise, that consistency, then you're much more apt to take an edible. Because for a long time, you know, edibles were a little taboo because you didn't know what you were going to get. And that's just not the case anymore. Science and the way that we're able to do things now just basically have completely alleviated that from the equation. On beverages, I think it's going to go one of two ways. You know, I'm not a huge believer in the beverage opportunity as it exists today. And the reason being is I think the use case doesn't really jive. You know, when you think about how most of us consume alcoholic beverages, it's not usually at your house by yourself, kind of down in the basement. And you usually have multiple of them. It's a social thing. So for me, I think the beverage opportunity really comes to be when it's at your local pub, or when you go to the, you know, your local Whole Foods and you can buy a 6-pack of these low-dosed beverages. Now, I think we're a long way off from that, but think about a beverage. Right now, if I go into a dispensary and I buy one and I try it, let's say it has 2 milligrams in it. Well, a lot of us won't even feel that. So you're probably not going to buy it again if you didn't get any effect from it. Or you've got to drink multiples of those beverages to get to whatever feeling it is that you're looking for. So I think there's promise there, but I think it's going to be a pretty long road. And when you look at what's required, the capital that's required for bottling facilities, some of these things have to be transported in refrigerated trucking. You know, we're keeping an eye on it. It's still pretty small. If you look across almost every market, you know, most of them are sub 1% of the consumption goes through beverages. California, I think, is the highest. Canada, I think, is getting up there too. But you're still talking low to mid single digits of what that represents as a market opportunity. And for us, there's just bigger categories to go after. So something we're looking at and paying attention to. I think in long term, there's certainly a home for beverages. And look, you've got, you know, folks like Constellation and Canopy that are investing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into that opportunity. So we'll see what they're able to create and carve out as far as that category is concerned. You know, so something we're paying attention to, but not something that SLANG is currently focused on, just because there's bigger fish to fry out there, in my opinion.
Do you feel like the fact that it's taken so long for that kind of, for the beverages to prove itself in any way, do you think that that's a sign of how kind of far there is to go, and kind of the chasm between how it works in theory and how it really is in reality? I think for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, or you think the timing just isn't right because the laws aren't, they don't work for how beverages will work for the consumer?
I think it's a mix of both. You know, again, the minute you can walk down to your local bar, or you walk down to your local liquor or gas station or whatever, and they're there, you're going to see a big quantum shift. I also think that's pretty far off. You know, when you look at the regulations, that's part of it, certainly, and being more widespread. A lot of it simply is just the tactical execution of how a beverage has to come to market. You know, the way we do anything when we develop a new product, and certainly a new brand, what's the market opportunity? How realistic can I put this across 16 different markets? You know, and the reality is that bottling equipment, making a beverage, certainly to do it at scale, A, takes a lot of capital. B, you're having to do that in each individual place. In some of these markets, you know, if you're looking at 1% of, you know, Vermont, for example, are you really going to invest that capital to capture 1% of the market in Vermont? Probably not. You know, maybe that makes sense in California just because it's such a wider market, or such a larger market. But I think it's a little mix of just what is the reality of what it takes to not only bring a beverage brand to market, but then to scale it, I think is prohibitive because of the capital that's required. And the regulations just aren't super conducive for that outside of the dispensary channel. So for me, it's always looking at what the market opportunity is, what's our ability to be able to address that market opportunity. And for us, I'm always looking at, it's not something I can just do in Colorado or just do in Oregon. I've got to be able to take the show on the road all across North America. So, there's a lot of different data points that go into our decisions there. But, unfortunately, beverages just have a lot of, headwinds still to be able to do that for a business like ours. Now, that being said, if you remove some of those impediments, then potentially it becomes a more attractive opportunity for us. But today, that's just not the case.
So since you've been in the cannabis industry, what's one thing that has kind of surprised you, like, seen it develop, a product, a part of the marketplace opening up, a type of company that you didn't think was going to be viable that is? Anything that surprised you? And then is there something that you see going forward that you feel like some people aren't paying attention to that they should be?
Yeah, a couple things. The first thing that's been the most surprising, I think, is how many people are into cannabis. Not just the investors, not just,
Yeah.
it's seemingly these tentacles stretch into every nook and
Yeah.
cranny of North American life. I think it's always been in the background, of course. It's not like cannabis is certainly new to anybody, but how wide reaching it's become. The soccer mom, the grandparent, the college kid, there's very few things, particularly in a CPG space, that have that wide of appeal to that many demographics of people, and particularly in the infused product space. I mean, you can make almost anything out of cannabis. So for me, just seeing how quickly that the industry has evolved from, I think back to 2010 and some of the products we were creating, and really just what was available in dispensaries at that time was such a far cry from today. Just the number of products, the form factor of products, the people that are coming in and consuming these products has just been just pretty breathtaking to watch. And then when you saw the Canadians legalize federally and all the money that flooded in, all the institutional capital really kind of put cannabis on, a lot more people's map other than just folks that were consuming the product. There's so many people involved in cannabis now that have never even consumed it. And to me, that's great. That just makes it more mainstream. It makes it more normalized on so many different fronts. So that's really been incredible to watch. I think what people need to watch out for moving forward is a couple of things. One, I hear so many people all the time say, Oklahoma's been the poster child for this. I'm going to get in the green rush. I'm going to get in the game. I've got, $100,000 in a dream, and, I'm going to grow up and be this multi-billion-dollar cannabis business. And can that happen? It can. Will it happen? That's a lot tougher now than it used to be, just because there is so much capital involved. There is so many folks that have already built those companies that are already, now consolidating other companies like that. So, I would tell new investors, particularly that are coming into it, that maybe don't know a whole lot about some of these companies, do your homework, do your research, see who's really doing something, because there's still a lot of puffery, frankly, that's out there. But the data is available, so do your homework. I think the other thing to watch out for too is, how long does cannabis stay in the system in the confines that it's in now? It's one thing if I have to go get a medical card and go to a doctor and then go to a dispensary and all this different stuff. That's a long journey to end up with cannabis from a regulated purveyor. And then you had adult use, and now I just have to be 21 and walk into a lot of these stores. But what happens when it's at 7-Eleven? What happens when it's at your local grocery store? Do we get to that point? What happens, in places like Colorado where delivery has now just become a thing? What happens when it's like Amazon and it just gets dropped off on my front doorstep? Those are the things that really excite us about what the opportunity is moving forward. And I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what cannabis really can be as a business for the world. And certainly there's a lot of people looking at this right now because so many states have tax revenue shortfalls due to the pandemic. And cannabis in a lot of different places is being looked at as a way to fill those gaps. And I think you're going to continue to see it become more and more and more and more mainstream. And I don't think it's so far off. I can see it within the next 5 to 10 years. That folks like Amazon or whoever the next great delivery company is going to be, that these things are just showing up at your house, and it has become, in many cases, I think more normalized than alcohol in time. So, that tells me that we're just, really in maybe the second or third inning of what could be. And that's exciting, particularly for these companies and folks like SLANG that are on the forefront of that. So for me, it's an exciting time to be in cannabis. It's an exciting time to be investing in cannabis. And I think the sky's the limit of where it can go.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think your point, meshes nicely with something that we've also been talking about, which is, when it does go federally legal, I think some people see it as, well, then Philip Morris is going to come in and really, do gangbusters on the cannabis, or, whoever the CPG company that's going to come in and really figure it out. But I think what's happened is these companies have already created brand recognition, brand awareness, a moat, an understanding of how to do these things, an understanding of how to maneuver and distribute the supply chain. And I think that that's no small thing, that you don't just get there just because you're a huge company with a ton of cash on the books. I think that happens over developing strategies and executing them and mistakes and, kind of learning from all that. And I think that it's not so simple to just come in and do that. And I think that people are going to be surprised that a lot of these companies in cannabis, the ones doing it right, with the right structure, with enough cash, with enough capital, being managed well, I think are going to be the leaders even when it becomes federally legal. I mean, I'm sure you agree with that, but do you agree with the reasoning kind of behind that?
You bet. And I would take it a step further that and say, look, there are a lot of people like, oh my God, the Philip Morrises or the Constellations, or, everybody's going to get pushed out. And the reality is most people will. Like that's not untrue.
Right.
However, there are certainly a lot of good examples, SLANG included, of people that are building market share. I mean, again, we're putting out over the last few years billions of branded servings. So if I'm a P&G, if I'm a Constellation, if I'm some of these mainstream guys, there's a pretty, there's the great history to show whether it's craft beer that's being bought up by the main brewers, whether it was smaller beverage kind of vitamin water and Coca-Cola. There's all kinds of different examples where you started pulling market share from some of these mainstream industries. And because they've got such huge, cash reserves, they come in and make acquisitions. They bought their market share back. The Coors, the AB InBevs of the world, they didn't just lose market share to craft brewing. They went and bought it back up. So I think there's a tremendous acquisition opportunity in time, but certainly there's going to be a handful of companies that are able to stand on their own 2 feet and go toe to toe in this industry, even post mainstream CPG coming in. So I think it bodes really well for SLANG, because if I'm some of these mainstream CPG, big alcohol, et cetera, companies coming in, I'm looking for market share. And I know that I can take that market share, that brand loyalty that's already been developed, and just throw gas all over that fire, because I've got big ag infrastructure. I've got huge distribution infrastructure. I'm going to buy something that people are already familiar with and already clearly voting with their dollars and buying. Why would I not take that and just throw a lot of different enablers into it? Why wouldn't I build on what's already there? And when you look at the market caps, even the largest, the Cannabis, the different folks in the world that are, $15-20 billion market cap companies that, in the grand scheme of things, compared to, really some of the big alcohol players, big tobacco players, that's not really big for them. So for them to be able to come and acquire some of those businesses, or simply to compete against those businesses, I think that opportunity is going to absolutely exist. And that's something we've long thought of. That's why we go into these markets in a capital light way. In the end, Does Philip Morris want to potentially buy us one day because I've got a big lab in Denver or I've got a big grow in Southern Oregon? No, that's not the reason that they're going to come in and look to make acquisitions. They're going to come in and say, how many people are buying your product? How many branded servings are out there? How many total points of distribution are you in? That's the language they speak. So if you speak that language and you demonstrate progress and success in doing those things, you're either going to have an opportunity to stand on your own, or you're going to have an opportunity to have a very successful exit and join a much larger company one day.
Yeah, well said, well said. Chris, this has been a great conversation. Anything you want to leave listeners with before we go? Or anything that you think that they should be paying attention to in the coming months?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of SLANG in particular, as I mentioned, we just crossed the threshold into being plant touching. So we've got our subsequent earnings calls coming up. You're going to see what that means. We're very excited to have those calls. And we continue to build, we continue to grow, we continue to work with literally the best of the best across this continent as far as bringing our brands to market. So we're very excited about what's ahead. We're very excited about what possibly could be happening with federal regulation. So I think it's a great time for the cannabis industry as a whole, and a great time for investors to really start looking at opportunities that exist in cannabis. And we'd encourage people to take a look at us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Chris, thank you so much. This has been a great talk about SLANG, but also about the broader marketplace. So I really appreciate you sharing your insights, and I hope to talk to you down the road and catch up on SLANG and what you guys have going on. But thank you so much for today's conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great to be here.